The plasma cutter screamed against the rusted hull of the derelict freighter, sending a cascade of orange sparks showering down onto Jace Rios's welding mask. He could smell the ozone, a sharp and metallic tang that stuck to the back of his throat like bad whiskey. It was the smell of Helix 9, the smell of 1,000 other mining moons just like it. And right now, it was the smell of a Tuesday shift that had gone on for 14 hours too long. Jace deactivated the cutter, the beam dying with a magnetic whine. He flipped his mask up, wiping a streak of grease from his forehead with the back of a gloved hand. Around him, the salvage bay was a cavernous maw of industry, lit by flickering sodium floodlights that cast long, dancing shadows against the skeletal remains of starships. "Hey, Rios," a voice crackled over the local comms channel in his ear. "We got a piece of junk over in Sector 4 that is making a weird humming noise. Figure it is right up your alley." Jace sighed, unhooking his mag boots from the freighter's hull and drifting down toward the gravity plating of the deck. "Let me guess," Jace said into his headset, his voice raspy from the dry recycled air. "It is glowing blue. It smells like cinnamon, and it is probably radioactive." "No," the voice, his foreman, Miller, chuckled. "It is pulsing green and smells like burning hair. But you are the magnet, kid. The weird stuff always follows you home." It was a running joke in the salvage yard. Most engineers found copper wiring, localized gravity coils, or scrap titanium. Jace Rios found unidentifiable alien tech. It was not a talent he wanted. It was just bad luck. "I am clocking out." "Miller," Jace said, landing on the deck with a heavy metallic thud. "If it blows up, take it out of my pay." He stripped off his heavy environmental suit in the locker room, revealing a lean frame scarred by a decade of working in zero-G environments. At 27, Jace felt older than he looked. He had the dark eyes of someone who was perpetually calculating escape velocities and interest rates. Stepping out of the salvage bay and into the main concourse of Helix 9 was like walking into a migraine. The mining moon was a hollowed-out asteroid, a beehive of tunnels and domes where humanity scraped out a living alongside a dozen other species who had nowhere else to go. Neon signs in 4 different languages flickered overhead, advertising synth noodle bars, oxygen refills, and shady pawnbrokers. The air was thick with the scent of fried oil and unwashed bodies. Jace navigated the crowd, keeping his head down. He passed a group of Krell miners, their chitinous shells dull and dusty, arguing with a human security officer who had his hand resting on a stun baton. Above them, a massive holographic billboard projected the smiling face of a human politician. "Unity is prosperity," the billboard declared. "The Integration Oversight Committee welcomes our non-human neighbors to a shared future." Jace snorted. The poster was peeling at the corner, revealing a graffiti tag underneath that read, "Earth First" in jagged red letters. He turned down a narrow alleyway, the sound of the main concourse fading into the rhythmic thrum of the station's life support scrubbers. He was not heading home to his cramped hab unit. He had a meeting. The contact was waiting in the back of a dimly lit bar called the Rust Bucket. It was the kind of place where the drinks were served in plastic pouches because glass could be used as a weapon. Dax was sitting in a booth, nursing a pouch of blue liquid. He was a weasel of a man, thin and jittery, with a cybernetic eye that whirred softly when he focused on something. "You are late," Dax hissed as Jace slid into the booth opposite him. "I was working," Jace said, signaling the drone waiter for a water. "Real work. You should try it sometime." Dax leaned forward, the cybernetic eye spinning. "Forget the salvage yard. Rios, I have found it. The big one. The score that clears your debt with the syndicate and buys you a ticket to a terraformed world. Jace rubbed his temples. I owe the syndicate 50,000 credits. Dax, unless you found a solid platinum asteroid, I am not interested. Better, Dax whispered, looking around suspiciously. There is an auction tonight, underground, down in the abandoned ore tunnels in Sector 12. They are selling a prototype, high-end alien relic. The rumors say it is older than the colonization of Mars. Jace stared at him. I fix engines. Dax, I do not steal artifacts. You do not have to steal it, Dax said, tapping the table. You just have to appraise it. My buyer needs to know it is real before he sends in his acquisition team. He needs a sensory engineer who knows weird tech. He needs you. 5,000 credits just for looking at it and giving the thumbs up. 5,000. That was 3 months of double shifts. It would not clear his debt, but it would keep the syndicate enforcers from breaking his legs for another 6 months. Jace looked at the untouched pouch of water the drone had dropped on the table. He was tired. He was broke, and he had a bad feeling settling in his gut like a stone. Fine, Jace said, but if this goes sideways, I am leaving you behind. The abandoned ore tunnels of Sector 12 were a jagged scar deep in the moon's crust. The air recyclers down here barely worked, leaving the atmosphere stale and cold. Jace pulled his jacket tighter around himself as they approached the heavy blast doors that marked the entrance to the auction site. 2 guards stood outside. They were not station security. They wore matte black armor with no insignias and held heavy pulse rifles with practiced ease. Dax flashed a digital credential on his datapad, and the doors groaned open. Inside, the tunnel had been transformed. Portable generators hummed, powering floodlights that illuminated a makeshift stage. The crowd was a mix of high society criminals, desperate brokers, and masked figures who preferred anonymity. Jace scanned the room. He saw a Vilery diplomat in shimmering silk robes, a trio of human corporate executives flanked by combat androids, and a few rough-looking mercenaries leaning against the rock walls. Keep your head down, Dax muttered. Just wait for the main lot. Jace moved toward the back, finding a spot near a stack of crates where he could see the stage without being in the middle of the crush. He grabbed a drink from a passing server bot, something that smelled like fermented algae, and leaned back, watching the room. That was when he saw her. She was standing near the edge of the crowd, isolated by an aura of palpable danger. She was tall, taller than most of the humans in the room, with a lithe, predatory grace that made the heavy combat armor she wore look like a second skin. The armor was a patchwork of matte ceramic and dark leather, scuffed and worn, but maintained with meticulous care. It left her shoulders and throat exposed, revealing pale skin marked with faint bioluminescent patterns that pulsed with a slow, rhythmic violet light. Her hair was dark, pulled back into a complex braid woven with silver metal rings that chimed softly when she turned her head. But it was her eyes that stopped Jace's breath for a second. They were luminous, a shifting shade of silver violet that seemed to catch every photon of light in the dim tunnel. She looked feral. She looked beautiful. She looked like she could tear the throat out of anyone in the room without spilling her drink. Jace realized he was staring. He tried to look away, shifting his weight, but the crowd surged forward as the auctioneer took the stage, and Jace was jostled to the side. He stumbled, his shoulder colliding hard with the armored woman. The drink in his hand sloshed violently, sending a splash of amber liquid cascading toward her chest piece. Her reaction was instant. A hand encased in a gauntlet shot out, gripping Jace's wrist with crushing force before the liquid could touch her. She shoved him back, not hard enough to knock him over, but hard enough to rattle his teeth. "Watch your step, human," she snarled. Her voice was low, a textured rasp that sounded like gravel grinding over velvet. Jace regained his balance, holding his hands up in a gesture of surrender. He shook his wrist, which was already throbbing. "Easy," Jace said, trying to find his footing and his dignity at the same time. "It is crowded in here. I did not mean to spill my cheap swill on your costume." He gestured vaguely at her armor, his mouth moving faster than his brain. "Nice rig, by the way. Very authentic. What is it? Werewolf cosplay? Some kind of retro fantasy convention in town?" The air between them seemed to drop 10 degrees. The woman's silver-violet eyes narrowed, and for a split second, the pupils constricted into vertical slits. Her upper lip curled back, revealing canines that were definitely too long and too sharp to be human implants. A low growl vibrated in her chest, a sound so deep Jace felt it in his own ribs. "Do not," she whispered, her voice deadly calm, "ever call me a wolf again." Jace swallowed hard. He had spent enough time around alien refugees to know he had just stepped on a major cultural landmine. "Right," Jace said, taking a half-step back. "My mistake. No wolves. Got it. I will just go stand over there. Way over there." She held his gaze for another second, her eyes flashing with a predatory warning, before she turned her back on him with dismissive arrogance. Jace let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding. "Mental note," he muttered to himself. "Do not annoy the woman with the fangs. Ladies, gentlemen, and sentient beings of all systems," the auctioneer boomed from the stage. He was a bloated man in a velvet suit, sweating under the spotlights. "We now come to the highlight of our evening, Lot 74. The crowd hushed. A containment field shimmered into existence on the center podium. Inside, hovering in magnetic suspension, was the relic. It was a disc, roughly the size of a dinner plate, made of a dark, obsidian-like crystal. The surface was etched with intricate, shifting runes that glowed with a faint, cold blue light. It did not look mechanical. It looked organic, ancient, and deeply unsettling. Jace squinted at it. His engineer's brain tried to categorize it. No power source visible, no input ports. The geometry of the runes suggested a fractal storage system, but the energy signature was wrong. It was bleeding ambient radiation. Dax appeared at his elbow. "That is it," he whispered. "Is it real?" Jace frowned. "It is active. Look at the field distortion around the edges. That thing is not just a hard drive. It is a transmitter, or a key." Before Dax could answer, the heavy blast doors at the entrance blew inward with a deafening concussion. Debris sprayed across the room. The crowd screamed and scattered as a squad of soldiers stormed through the smoke. They were human, wearing tactical gear with no markings, moving with military precision. "Secure the target!" one of them shouted. At the same moment, the ventilation grates in the ceiling exploded downward. 3 figures dropped into the chaos. They were not human. They were lithe, masked aliens wielding plasma blades that hummed with vicious energy. It was a 2-front raid. Chaos erupted. Laser fire crisscrossed the air, sizzling against the rock walls. The wealthy patrons dove for cover, overturning tables and crates. Jace grabbed Dax by the collar and hauled him behind a heavy ore cart just as a plasma bolt scorched the ground where they had been standing. "We need to leave," Jace shouted over the roar of weapons fire. Dax was hyperventilating, his cybernetic eye spinning wildly. "My commission. I need to verify the sale." "Forget the commission," Jace yelled. On the stage, the containment field flickered and died as a stray shot hit the generator. The relic dropped onto the podium. Jace saw the woman, Lisi, though he did not know her name yet, move. She did not run for cover. She sprinted toward the stage, moving faster than any human could. She vaulted over a pile of debris, dodging fire with unnatural reflexes. Her eyes locked on the relic. She reached the podium at the same moment one of the masked alien strikers lunged for it. Lisi tackled the striker, slamming them into the ground with a bone-crunching impact. She spun, grabbing the relic with one hand. But the human soldiers had targeted the stage. "Suppressing fire," a commander barked. A hail of kinetic rounds hammered the podium. Lisi was pinned, crouched behind the metal stand, debris raining down on her. A large section of the ceiling rigging, weakened by the blast, groaned and swung downward, threatening to crush her and the relic. Jace did not think. He did not calculate the odds. He did not consider his debt or his safety. He just saw someone about to be flattened. He bolted from behind the ore cart. "Rios!" Dax screamed. Jace slid across the floor, diving onto the stage just as the rigging slammed down. He shoulder-checked Lisi, knocking her sideways out of the crush zone. But the impact sent them both skidding toward the exposed control pedestal of the containment unit. The relic tumbled from Lisi's hand, spinning across the metal floor. It came to a stop right between them. A soldier leveled a rifle at them from 10 yards away. Lisi snarled, reaching for a weapon at her hip. But she was tangled in the fallen rigging. She could not reach the relic. Jace saw the soldier's finger tighten on the trigger. He saw the relic pulsing faster, the blue light turning to a blinding white. He saw a control pad on the pedestal blinking red, a manual override or a self-destruct. He did not know. He slammed his hand onto the pad, hoping to trigger the containment field back on, hoping to create a shield. His hand hit the interface. His blood, cut from the slide, smeared across the sensor. The relic did not put up a shield. It screamed. A shockwave of pure psychic pressure slammed into Jace's mind. It was not a sound. It was a feeling. A howl of ancient, hungry loneliness finding a door and kicking it open. The relic exploded, not with fire, but with light. Cold, impossible light that flooded the cavern. Jace screamed, but he could not hear his own voice. He felt tendrils of energy, like liquid ice, shooting up his arm from the control pad. They burned through his skin, diving into his nerves, hunting for his very center. Across from him, Lisi arched her back, a guttural cry tearing from her throat. The energy arced from the relic to Jace, and then from Jace to her, creating a blinding triangle of connection. Jace watched, paralyzed, as glowing sigils burned themselves into his forearm, intricate, swirling geometric patterns that matched the runes on the disc. He looked at Lisi. The same blue-white fire was etching itself across her exposed collarbones, searing the skin. The world went white. Then, silence. The light faded. The relic lay inert on the floor, cracked down the middle, its glow gone. Jace gasped, rolling onto his back, clutching his arm. It felt like he had stuck his hand into a fusion reactor. His head was pounding with a dual heartbeat. One was his, fast and terrified. The other was slow, powerful, and furious. He looked up. Lisi was rising from the debris, but she had changed. Her armor was scorched. Her eyes were no longer silver-violet. They were a burning, molten gold. Her canines had lengthened into true fangs. Her fingernails were now dark, curved claws that dug into the metal floor. The bioluminescent markings on her skin were flaring with an angry, rhythmic pulse. She looked at the sigil burning on her collarbone. Then she looked at the matching mark on Jace's arm. She lunged. Jace scrambled backward, but she was too fast. She pinned him to the ground, her hand gripping his jaw, her claws pricking his skin. Her face was inches from his, her breath hot and smelling of ozone and predator. She did not rip his throat out. She stared into his eyes, her pupils dilating and contracting rapidly. "What have you done, human?" she snarled. the voice vibrating in Jace's skull as much as in his ears. Jace stared up at her, his heart hammering against his ribs. He could feel her anger, but underneath it, he felt something else, a terrified, possessive need to be close to him. It was an alien emotion, flooding his brain. I was trying to save you, Jace stammered, his voice cracking. She released his jaw, sitting back on her heels, her golden eyes wide with horror. She looked at the dead relic, then back at him. You activated the protocol, she whispered. You synced the biosignature. Jace looked at the glowing tattoo on his arm. It was fading to a dull, bruised purple, but he could still feel it humming. I accidentally claimed an alien werewolf girl, Jace said, a hysterical laugh bubbling up in his chest. Now she will never let me go. It was half a joke, a defense mechanism against the absurdity of his death. But Lisi did not laugh. She grabbed him by the collar of his jacket, hauling him to his feet with shocking strength. Run, she commanded. The soldiers were recovering from the flash. Lasers began to snap through the air again. Jace stumbled, but Lisi did not let go. She clamped her hand around his wrist right over the fresh brand, and a jolt of electricity sparked between them. It was not painful, it was grounding, like plugging into a live circuit. She dragged him toward a maintenance hatch in the back wall. Jace struggled to keep up with her stride. She moved with a limping gait, favoring her left leg, but she refused to release him. Leave me, Jace shouted as a chunk of rock exploded near his head. You are faster alone. No, Lisi roared back, spinning to fire a small kinetic pistol at their pursuers. I cannot leave you. She shoved him through the hatch and slammed the locking mechanism. They were in a service tunnel, dark and damp. Jace leaned against the wall, gasping for air. Lisi paced back and forth, her claws clicking on the grate, her golden eyes scanning the shadows. She kept glancing at him, checking he was still there, her nostrils flaring as she took in his scent. Jace looked down at his arm. What did you mean? Claiming? Lisi stopped pacing. She looked at him, and for a moment, the feral light in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a profound, crushing exhaustion. That relic, she said, gesturing vaguely back toward the auction hall. It is not just a drive. It is a binding stone, used by my people for specialized unions, soul bonds. Jace blinked. Soul bonds? Like marriage, like gravity, Lisi corrected grimly. It ties survival to proximity. It ties senses to senses. You activated it. You are the anchor. She took a step toward him, her hand reaching out involuntarily before she snatched it back. And now, she said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. My biology thinks you are my mate. If you die, the feedback will cripple me. If you leave, I will hunt you down. Not because I want to, because I have to. Jace slid down the wall until he was sitting on the dirty floor. Great. Just great. I have a debt collector, a salvage quota, and now a psychic werewolf stalker. Lisi bared her teeth at him. I told you not to call me that. A boom echoed from the blast door they had just sealed. The soldiers were cutting through. We have to move, Lisi said. She reached down and pulled him up. This time, Jace noticed something. On the shoulder plate of her armor, there was a deep scratch from the fight, but under the grime, on the armor of the soldiers who had attacked them, he had seen a symbol. Wait, Jace said as they began to jog down the tunnel. The guys shooting at us. They had insignias, a red triangle with a black eye in the center. Lisi froze. She looked at him, her expression hardening. Are you sure? She asked. I have a good memory for details, Jace said. It is part of the job. Red triangle, black eye. Lisi cursed in a language that sounded like grinding stones. That is not a random raid, she said. That is the Integration Oversight Committee's Black Ops Division, and the aliens with them. Those were separatist mercenaries. She looked at Jace, her grip on his wrist tightening until it was almost painful. They were working together, she realized, the humans and the separatists. They were working together to get the stone. Why? Jace asked. Lisi looked at the glowing mark on his arm, then up at his face. Her expression was unreadable, part fury, part fear, and part intense, overriding protectiveness. Because, she said, pulling him deeper into the dark, they want to know if it is possible to enslave a Lycanthari. And congratulations, human. We just gave them the proof. She turned and pulled him into a run. Jace followed, the strange, cold fire in his arm pulsing in time with her heartbeat, leading them further into the dark underbelly of Helix 9 with no idea of the storm they had just unleashed. The consciousness returned to Jace Rios like a slow tide washing over a beach of broken glass. His first sensation was not pain, but heat, a heavy enveloping warmth that smelled of ozone, crushed pine needles, and something metallic, the scent of a thunderstorm trapped in a bottle. He blinked his eyes open, greeted by the corrugated, rust-eaten ceiling of a shipping container. The air was stale, recycled too many times, tasting of oil and dust. He tried to sit up, but a weight pinned him down. It was a cloak, heavy, woven from some dark ballistic fabric, lined with soft fur that tickled his chin. Jace groaned, shifting his arm. A sharp, rhythmic throb pulsed from his right forearm, syncing perfectly with a dull ache behind his eyes. He pulled his arm out from under the cloak. The skin was angry and red, but the sigils were unmistakable. They were not burns, they were part of him now. Bioluminescent geometric patterns glowing with a faint, steady violet light beneath the dermis. They looked like circuitry grown from flesh. "You are awake." The voice came from the shadows near the container's hatch. Jace flinched, the movement sending a fresh spike of adrenaline through his system. Lisi was sitting on a crate, her knees pulled to her chest, perched with the impossible balance of a predatory bird. She was not wearing her helmet. Her face was smudged with soot, her dark hair half loose from its braid, the silver rings catching the low light of the emergency lantern. Her eyes were fixed on him. They were no longer the terrifying molten gold of the transformation, but they had not returned to the cool silver violet either. They were restless, shifting like oil on water. "Where are we?" Jace croaked. His throat felt like he had swallowed a handful of desert sand. "Sub-level 42, Lisi said. An abandoned storage sector, and it is shielded from long-range thermal scans." She hopped down from the crate. There was no sound when her boots hit the metal floor. She moved toward him, and Jace felt a sudden, bizarre sensation in his chest, a wave of relief that was not his own. It washed over him, followed immediately by a sharp spike of irritation. Jace rubbed his chest. "Stop doing that." "Stop doing what?" Lisi asked, stopping 2 feet from his makeshift cot. "Stop putting your feelings in my ribcage," Jace said, sitting up and letting the heavy cloak pool around his waist. "I can feel you. You were worried. And now you are annoyed that I know you were worried." Lisi stiffened, her jaw tightened, and she looked away, crossing her arms over her chest plate. "It is the resonance," she muttered. "The claiming bond is not subtle, human. It is designed to ensure the survival of the pair." Jace swung his legs over the edge of the cot. The floor was cold. He looked at the glowing tattoo on his arm, then at the matching one visible on Lisi's neck, just above the collar of her armor. "Explain it to me," Jace said, "and use small words. I am just a salvage engineer who had a very bad night." Lisi sighed, a sound that was half growl. The Lycanthari claiming bond is an ancient biological imperative. Before we had starships, before we had treaties. My people survived on Deathworlds. The bond was how we ensured the strongest genetic pairings survived. It is a mix of ritual magic and retroviral bonding. She pointed a clawed finger at his arm. It links our nervous systems, she continued. It synchronizes our adrenaline response, our pain receptors, and our location sense. It amplifies everything. If I get hurt, you bleed. If you panic, I go into a combat fugue state. It is meant to be the ultimate partnership. She paused, her eyes narrowing. It is also usually done after years of courtship, with family approval, and a lot of expensive ceremony. It is not done by accident in a collapsing mine shaft with a human who smells like engine grease. Jace looked at her. He could feel the humiliation radiating off her like heat from a radiator. It was a sharp, acidic tang in his mind. She was embarrassed. She was a high-born alien warrior, and she was stuck with him. "Hey," Jace said, trying for a smile that felt crooked on his face. "I will have you know this is premium engine grease. Very expensive." Lisi did not smile. She stepped closer, invading his personal space with an intensity that made the hair on his arm stand up. "This is not a joke. Jace," she said, using his name for the first time. It sounded strange in her accent, the vowels slightly too long. "You have no idea what you have done. You are now a target. And because of this," she gestured between them, "I cannot leave you. My biology recognizes you as my primary survival priority." Jace swallowed. "So, we are stuck together, like, legally? Physically?" Lisi corrected. "If we separate by more than a few hundred meters, the bond will induce psychosomatic pain, migraines, nausea, eventually organ failure. It forces proximity until the bond is fully stabilized." Jace stared at her. "Organ failure. Great, just great." He stood up, his knees popping. "Well, if we are going to be joined at the hip, I need coffee. And a weapon that is not a wrench." "We need to move," Lisi said, her gaze snapping toward the door. "The security lockdown is tightening. They are sweeping the upper levels." She reached out and grabbed his wrist. Her grip was firm, her skin fever-hot against his. A jolt of electricity, pleasant and terrifying, shot up Jace's arm. He felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to protect her, to stand in front of her. He shook his head, trying to clear the alien instinct. "Okay," Jace said. "We move. But you are leading. I do not know how to sneak past a Black Ops kill squad." As they moved through the corridors of the underbelly, the reality of the bond became a comedy of errors wrapped in a nightmare. Helix 9's lower decks were a maze of piping, dripping condensation and flickering lights. It was crowded with the station's unwanted scavengers, unlicensed traders, and refugees. Jace tried to walk normally, to blend in. But Lisi made it impossible. She shadowed him, literally. Every time Jace took a step, she was there, her shoulder brushing his. If he lagged behind to look at a route map on the wall, she stopped instantly, pivoting to guard his back. At a crowded intersection, a large dock worker, a four-armed Brontian, shoved past Jace, knocking him slightly off balance. Before Jace could even mutter an apology, a low, vibrating growl erupted from Lisi's chest. She lunged, grabbing the Brontian by his lower set of arms and shoving him into the bulkhead with enough force to dent the metal. Her fangs flashed, glinting in the neon light. "Watch your spacing," she snarled. The Brontian, who was twice her size, looked terrified. He scrambled away the moment she let go. "Lisi," Jace hissed, grabbing her arm and pulling her into an alcove. "You have to dial it down. We are trying to be inconspicuous. You just threatened to eviscerate a guy for bumping into me." "He is a threat," Lisi said, her eyes still tracking the fleeing dock worker. "My instincts identified him as a hostile variable. He is a stevedore named Gary, Jace said. I owe him 10 credits for a card game. He is not an assassin. Lisi looked at Jace, her nostrils flaring as she took in his scent. The bond flared in Jace's mind, a wave of possessive, irrational heat. She wanted to wrap him in armor. She wanted to hide him in a cave. You are fragile, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. The bond screams it at me. You have no carapace, no claws. Your bones are porous calcium. I feel anxiety, constant anxiety that you will break. Jace stared at her. The intensity in her eyes was suffocating, yet strangely touching. I have survived 27 years without a bodyguard, Jace said softly. I am tougher than I look. Lisi snorted, crossing her arms. Debatable. She stepped back, but only an inch. Jace sighed. Look, if we are going to do this, you have to heal. Lisi's eyes went wide. She looked like she was debating whether to kiss him or tear his throat out. Excuse me, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. It was a joke, Jace said quickly, raising his hands. Bad joke. But seriously, you are like a terrifying, beautiful space dog. You are growling at the mailman and you have to chill. Lisi stared at him for a long beat. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of her mouth twitched. A short, sharp huff of air escaped her nose. Terrifying. Beautiful space dog, she repeated, testing the words. Better than Space Wolf? Jace offered. Marginally, Lacey said. If you call me a poodle, I will break your finger. Deal, Jace said. They kept moving, but the tension had shifted. It was no longer just fear. It was a shared, grim camaraderie. They were two disasters orbiting each other. They needed information. Jace suggested meeting a contact of his, a security officer named Rhea who worked the perimeter checkpoints. She had looked the other way for him on a few salvage runs in the past. They found her at a small, open-air cafe in the mid-sector, a place that smelled of synthetic coffee and burning ozone. Rhea was human, sharp-featured, with a scar running through her eyebrow. She was stirring a cup of caffeine, looking bored, when Jace sat down opposite her. Rhea didn't jump. She just looked up, her eyes flicking to Lisi, who was standing directly behind Jace's chair, radiating menace. You are a popular man today, Rios, Rhea said, taking a sip of her drink. There is a bounty on your head. And on your friend. This is Lisi, Jace said. We need a way off the station. Rhea, a transport, a cargo hauler, anything. Rhea leaned back, studying them. Her eyes lingered on Jace's arm, which he had covered with a bandage. You two stepped in something deep, Rhea said quietly. The station is locked down. Orders from the top. The Integration Oversight Committee has taken jurisdiction from station security. The committee? Lisi's voice was sharp. They are a diplomatic think tank. They do not have jurisdiction over mining colonies. They do now, Rhea said. They have drones sweeping the vents. They are looking for a biological contaminant. That is you, isn't it? Jace leaned forward. Rhea, please. I have known you for 3 years. Rhea looked around the cafe. Her gaze was calculated. She tapped a finger on the table. There is a freighter leaving Docking Bay 7 in 2 hours. It is off manifest. I can get you codes, but you owe me, Rios. Big time. Thank you, Jace breathed. Rhea slid a data pad across the table. It had a map and an access code. Be careful, she said. The committee is not just looking for you, they are hunting. As they walked away, Jace felt a surge of relief, but Lisi grabbed his shoulder, pulling him into the shadow of a vending kiosk. She is lying, Lisi whispered. What? Jace frowned. No. Rhea is solid. She helps smugglers. She smelled of deception, Lisi hissed. Her heart rate did not elevate when she saw us. It was too steady, controlled, and I heard a frequency, a high-pitched whine coming from her jacket. A transmitter. Jace looked back at the cafe. Rhea was still sitting there, but she was speaking into her wrist comms now. We are being herded, Lisi realized. Docking Bay 7. It is a trap. If it is a trap, Jace said, his mind racing, then we need to go somewhere they do not expect. Lisi nodded. My people have an envoy on the station. High-level diplomatic immunity. If I can reach him, I can claim sanctuary. It is a political nightmare, but it might keep them from shooting us on sight. The Lycanthari diplomatic suite was located in the high sector, a place of polished chrome and filtered air that smelled of lavender and money. Getting there required sneaking through maintenance shafts to bypass the elevator checkpoints, a process that left Jace covered in grease and Lisi looking furious. The suite was lavish, decorated with hanging tapestries of woven starlight fiber. The envoy, a tall, older Lycanthari male with fur graying at the temples, stood by a massive viewport looking out at the asteroid field. His name was Varric. He turned as they entered, his lip curling in a sneer that mirrored the one Lisi had given Jace at the auction. You have disgraced your bloodline. Lysithra, Varric said, his voice cold. We were attacked, Lisi said, standing tall despite her ruined armor. The committee is working with separatists. They tried to steal the relic, and you allowed a human to touch it. Varric spat. He looked at Jace as if he were a roach on a wedding cake. You have bonded with a scavenger, a primitive. Hey, Jace said, stepping forward, I am right here. And for the record, I saved her life. Varric ignored him. He walked closer, his eyes locking onto the bandaged arm. He reached out, grabbing Jace's wrist and ripping the bandage away. The sigils were pulsing faster now, reacting to the stress in the room. Varric stared at the marks. His expression changed. The disgust faded, replaced by a cold, scientific fascination. Symmetrical, he murmured. The energy distribution is perfectly balanced. Usually, a human nervous system burns out within minutes of a claiming, but he is adapting. He looked up at Lisi, a strange light in his eyes. Do you realize what this is? Varric asked. The committee has been theorizing about this for years. A stable cross-species bond. It is not just a mistake. Lysithra. It is a prototype. Jace felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Prototype for what? Jace asked. Varric dropped his hand. For control. If a human can bond with a Lycanthari, then our loyalty, our strength, our psychic networks, they can be accessed, directed. Lisi stepped back, pulling Jace with her. You are not offering us sanctuary, are you? Varric smoothed his robes. I am a pragmatist. Lysithra. A war is coming. If this bond of yours can be weaponized, it is a bargaining chip. I cannot let you leave, Lisi growled, a sound of pure betrayal. Run, she said to Jace. Before Varric could summon his guards, the wall behind them exploded. It was not the station security. It was the masked alien mercenaries from the auction. They had tracked the bond resonance. Smoke filled the room. Varric was thrown across the floor. Jace was blinded by dust. He felt a hand grab the back of his jacket. Lisi, move! She screamed. They scrambled through the shattered wall, out into the service corridor. Plasma fire sizzled past Jace's ear, singing his hair. They ran, down stairwells, leaping over railings. Lisi was a blur of motion, shoving Jace out of the line of fire, taking a grazing shot to her shoulder plate that would have taken Jace's arm off. They burst into a cargo loading bay, a massive cavern filled with shipping containers stacked like skyscrapers. In here, Jace yelled, diving into a gap between two towering crates of mining equipment. They slid into the dark recess, Jace dragging Lisi down with him. They huddled in the shadows, chests heaving. Outside, the heavy boots of the mercenaries clanked on the metal deck. They were searching. Jace looked at Lisi. She was trembling, not from fear but from the crash. The adrenaline was spiking the bond, turning her blood to fire. Her eyes were blown wide, the pupils swallowing the irises. She was hyperventilating. "Lisi," Jace whispered. "You okay?" She looked at him. The bond slammed into Jace's mind like a physical blow. It was a tsunami of sensation. Her heart was beating so fast it sounded like a hummingbird. He could feel the heat radiating off her skin. "It is too much," she gasped, clutching at her chest. "The fight, the danger, the bond wants. It wants to secure the connection." She lunged at him. It wasn't an attack. She pinned him against the cold metal of the crate, her hands gripping his shirt, bunching the fabric. She pressed her body against his, burying her face in the crook of his neck. Jace froze. He could feel every curve of her armor, the heat of her body searing through his clothes. He could smell her scent, wild, spicy, intoxicating. The bond was screaming in his head. Claim, protect, keep. He felt her desire. It was raw and terrifyingly honest. She wanted him. She wanted to bite him, to mark him, to make sure he never left. "Lisi." Jace breathed, his hands coming up to hover over her waist, unsure if he should touch her. She pulled back slightly, looking up at him. Her face was flushed, her lips parted. The bioluminescent marks on her skin were blazing bright violet. "I can feel you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You want this too. Do not lie to me. Human. I can feel your heart." Jace couldn't deny it. The bond was a two-way street. The fear of the chase had morphed into a desperate, jagged need for affirmation. He wanted to kiss her. He wanted to forget the mercenaries and the politics and just exist in this small, heated space with her. "I do," Jace admitted, his voice rough. "I really do." She let out a sound that was half sob, half growl, and surged forward, her mouth crashed onto his. It was not a gentle kiss. It was fierce, messy, and desperate. Her lips were hot, her teeth grazing his lower lip. Jace's hands found her waist, pulling her closer, his fingers digging into the leather of her undersuit. She tasted like copper and electric storms. For a moment, Jace forgot where they were. He forgot the assassins. He forgot he was human. He just felt the circuit closing. The bond roared in approval, a golden warmth flooding his veins, erasing the pain in his arm. Lisi's hand came up to cup his face, her claws extending slightly, the tips pressing dangerously into the skin behind his ear. It was a threat and a caress all at once. Then she stiffened. She tore herself away, gasping, pushing him back against the crate. "Stop," she panted, her chest heaving. "We have to stop." Jace stood there, dazed, his lips tingling. "Why?" "If we finish this," Lisi stammered, shaking her head, her eyes wide with panic. "If we consummate the bond while the adrenaline is this high, it locks." "Locks? Genetic fusion," she said. "Irreversible. It changes the neural pathways permanently. You would never be able to be away from me. It would rewrite who you are." She looked at him, her expression tortured. "I will not do that to you," she whispered. "I will not make you a prisoner of my biology just because I cannot control myself." Jace looked at her. He saw the monster she thought she was, and he saw the woman who was fighting her own nature to save him. "Lisi," Jace said softly. He reached out, taking her hand. Her claws retracted instantly at his touch. "I want you," Jace said, looking her in the eye. "But I want to choose you. Not because of a glow stick tattoo. Because of you. Lisi let out a shaky breath, leaning her forehead against his chest. You are a fool. Jace Rios, she murmured. Yeah, Jace said, resting his chin on the top of her head. But I am your fool. Now, how do we get out of here before the lizard guys find us? Lisi pulled back, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. She took a deep breath, visibly compartmentalizing the lust and the fear. The soldier was back. We cannot stay on Helix 9, she said. Varric was right about one thing. We are specimens here. We need answers. We need to know how to break this or how to master it. She looked up at him. There is a moon, Virel 3. It is a jungle world in the uncontrolled sector. There is a scientist there, Dr. Kor. He was exiled from my clan for experimenting with bond theory. He thought the bond should be democratic, not arranged. An outlaw scientist, Jace said. Sounds promising and dangerous. He is our only chance, Lisi said. If anyone can undo this or help us understand it, it is him. Jace nodded. Okay, Virel 3. But first, we need a ship, and I think I know which freighter in this bay has the worst security. He peeked around the edge of the crate. Grab your gear, space dog, Jace said, a grin touching his lips. We are going to steal a ride. Lisi rolled her eyes, but she checked the charge on her pistol, falling into step beside him. The bond hummed between them, no longer a scream, but a steady, waiting purr. They were still hunted, still confused, and still in mortal danger. But they were moving in the same direction. The stolen freighter, a rust bucket hauler named the Iron Mule, smelled of recycled coolant and 3 generations of unwashed smugglers. It was not built for passengers, and it certainly was not built for a human salvage engineer and a Lycanthari warrior fugitive to share a sleeping pod the size of a coffin. Jace Rios lay on the floor of the cramped compartment, his back pressed against the vibrating metal plating. He had given Lisi the single, narrow bunk, mostly because he valued his limbs and did not want to accidentally elbow a sleeping werewolf. But the arrangement was proving futile. Every time Jace drifted into a restless doze, he would wake up to find Lisi's arm dangling off the bunk, her hand gripping his shoulder, or worse, find that she had unconsciously slid down from the mattress to curl up on the floor beside him. Go back to bed. Lisi, Jace grumbled, shifting his position. His hip was digging into a bolt head. I am freezing, Lisi mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. And you are warm. It is efficient. It is suffocating, Jace countered, though he did not push her away when she tucked her head under his chin. Her body heat was higher than a human's, radiating a furnace-like warmth that soaked through his thin flight suit. The glowing sigils on his arm pulsed in a slow, rhythmic beat that matched the thrumming of her heart against his ribs. It was annoying. It was invasive. It was the most comforting thing Jace had felt in 10 years. I can hear you thinking. Human, Lisi murmured, her eyes still closed. You are loud. I am not thinking, Jace lied. I am calculating the structural integrity of this ship. The port thruster has a rattle that sounds like a death rattle. You are thinking about how I smell, Lisi noted. You smell like ozone and wet dog, Jace said. I smell like rain and superior genetics, she corrected, tightening her grip on his shirt. The banter was a shield, a way to keep the terrifying reality of their situation at bay. But the universe had a way of shattering shields. 2 hours later, the Iron Mule hit the meteor storm. It started with a shudder that groaned through the hull, followed by the violent clang of debris impacting the shields. The gravity generators flickered, sending Jace and Lisi floating a few inches off the floor before slamming them back down. The ship lurched hard to starboard. The sudden spike of cortisol in Jace's blood acted like a catalyst for the bond. The fear was not just his, it was hers, and because the bond was still raw, still unsettled, the barrier between their minds dissolved. Jace gasped, clutching his head. The cramped cabin vanished. Suddenly, he was not on a spaceship. He was 6 years old, standing knee-deep in brown, churning water. The sky was a bruised purple, the color of a hurricane bruise. He was holding a plastic toy boat, shivering violently. He could smell the rot of the ocean reclaiming the land. He saw his mother, her face etched with a terror she was trying to hide, packing a bag with shaking hands. "We have to go. Jace, the seawall is breaching." The feeling of smallness was overwhelming, the crushing weight of being a fragile biological speck in the path of an indifferent, violent nature. The fear of being left behind, the fear of drowning. Then, the image shattered, replaced by cold, gray stone. Jace blinked, but he was not Jace. He was looking down at hands that were clawed and covered in fine, dark fur. He was kneeling on a hard floor, surrounded by towering figures in ceremonial armor. The air smelled of incense and blood. Emotion is a tool. Lysithra, a deep, cold voice boomed, "Not a master." He felt the sting of a training rod across his back, Lisi's back. He felt the shame of failure. He heard the lectures, drilled into him for hours. "Humans are dust," the instructor sneered, pointing at a holographic chart of the species. "They break. They die. They are soft. To bond with one is to chain yourself to a corpse. You are Lycanthari. You are iron. Iron does not alloy with clay." Jace gasped, snapping back to reality as the ship stabilized. He was trembling, sweat soaking his hairline. Lisi was staring at him, her golden eyes wide and haunted. She had pulled away to the far corner of the small room, her chest heaving. "You saw it," she whispered. "The training. And you saw the flood," Jace rasped. They stared at each other across the dark cabin. The bond was humming, a live wire of shared trauma. Jace finally understood the source of her arrogance. It was not pride. It was a defense mechanism drilled into her since birth. She had been taught that vulnerability was death, and he was the ultimate vulnerability. And she had seen his deepest insecurity, the belief that he was just debris, something to be washed away when the tide rose. "I am not clay. Lisi," Jace said softly, the silence heavy between them. Lisi looked at him, her expression unreadable. "No, you are not." She moved back across the floor, but this time, there was no joking, no jostling for space. She sat beside him, pressing her shoulder firmly against his, offering her strength to steady his shaking hands. They sat like that for the rest of the journey, silent watchers in the dark, bound by the storm inside and out. The jungle moon of Virel 3 was a hallucination brought to life. As Jace and Lisi stepped off the ramp of the freighter and into the dense undergrowth, the humidity hit them like a physical wall. The air was thick, tasting of sweet rot and electric spores. It was night on this side of the moon, but it was not dark. The jungle glowed, every leaf, every vine, every patch of moss pulsed with bioluminescence. Towering fern-like trees spiraled hundreds of feet into the air, their trunks veined with neon blue sap. Jace stumbled over a root, his boots sinking into mud that glowed pink where he stepped. "Watch your footing," Lisi warned, her voice low. She was moving ahead of him, cutting a path with a vibro machete she had liberated from the ship's supplies. Her movement was mesmerizing. In the salvage yards, Jace was graceful in zero gravity, but down here, in the gravity well in the muck, he felt like a clumsy toddler. Lisi, however, flowed. She stepped over tripvines without looking, ducked under low branches before Jace even saw them, and paused every few meters to sniff the air. her ears twitching at sounds Jace could not hear. "There is something tracking us," Lizzie murmured, pausing by a cluster of glowing mushrooms that stood as tall as a man. Jace froze, reaching for the small pistol at his belt. "What is it? Committee?" "No," Lizzie said, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the canopy. "Local fauna, 6 legs, arboreal. It is curious, not hunting. Yet." She reached back without looking, grabbing Jace's hand. Her grip was firm, grounding. "Close your eyes for a second," she instructed. "Why? Just do it. Trust the bond." Jace closed his eyes. Immediately, the world expanded. He could not see. But suddenly, he could perceive. He felt the vibration of insects in the trees through the soles of his boots. He smelled the sharpness of a predator's musk 300 yards to the west. He felt the location of the 6-legged watcher in the branches above, a distinct, bright pinprick of biological heat in his mind. He opened his eyes, gasping. "That is useful," Jace whispered. "Do not get used to it," Lizzie said, though she did not let go of his hand. "It drains my metabolic reserves to share sensory input like that, but it beats you falling into a carnivorous pitcher plant." They trekked for 4 hours, moving deeper into the luminous wilderness. The bond made them a single unit. When Lizzie tensed, Jace stopped. When Jace grew tired, Lizzie slowed her pace without him having to ask. It was an intimacy that went beyond words, a silent conversation of muscle and nerve. They found the laboratory just before dawn. It was hidden behind a massive waterfall that cascaded down a cliff face of obsidian rock. The water glowed with phosphorescent algae, creating a curtain of shimmering light. Lizzie led Jace along a narrow ledge, slipping behind the water and finding a concealed airlock door covered in moss. She punched a code into the keypad, a sequence she remembered from her childhood memories of the exile. The door hissed open. The lab inside was a chaotic blend of high-tech sterilization and jungle encroachment. Vines hung from the ceiling, intertwined with fiber-optic cables. Screens flickered with data streams, casting a blue light over rows of bubbling specimen tanks. Standing at a central console was a lycanthari who looked like he had been put through a trash compactor and survived out of spite. Dr. Kor was old, his fur patchy and gray, one of his ears missing a tip. He wore a stained lab coat over combat fatigues. "I told Varric I would shoot anyone he sent," Kor croaked, not turning around. He was looking at a monitor. "We are not with Varric," Lizzie said, stepping into the light. Kor spun around, a pulse pistol in his hand. He lowered it slowly when he saw Lizzie's face, and then he saw the glowing sigils on her neck. His eyes widened, darting to Jace's arm. "Well," Kor rasped, holstering the weapon and shuffling forward. "Look at what the cat dragged in. A prime claiming. And with a human." He grabbed Jace's arm, examining the marks with cold. Metal instruments that pinched. "Ouch," Jace complained. "Fascinating," Kor muttered, ignoring him. "The geometric stability is absolute. No degradation." He looked up at Lizzie. "You know what this is, girl? This is heresy. Beautiful, dangerous heresy." "Fix it," Lizzie said, her voice tight. "Unbind us." Kor laughed, a sound like dry leaves crunching. "Unbind? You cannot unbind an omelet, child. You can only eat it or throw it away." He motioned for them to sit on a pair of examination stools. "The claiming bond," Kor began, pacing back and forth, "was once sacred, a survival mechanism for the deep winters of our homeworld. But then the politicians got involved. Then the Integration Oversight Committee started asking questions." He tapped a key on his console. A holographic map of the galaxy appeared, overlaid with a web of red lines connecting star systems. "They call it the Harmony Grid," Kor said. The human admirals and your father, Lysithra, they have been plotting this for a decade. They do not want peace. They want a surveillance network. Jace frowned. How does a marriage bond create a surveillance network? Because the bond is a quantum entanglement of nervous systems. Core explained, if you tweak the frequency, if you alter the ritual just slightly, you can transmit data. You can transmit commands. Imagine an army of bonded pairs, human and lycanthari. If the commanders want a platoon to feel no fear, they stimulate the bond. If they want to torture a spy for information, they stimulate the pain centers of his partner 1,000 miles away. Jace felt sick. It was slavery disguised as love. My government is in on this? Jace asked. Up to their necks. Core confirmed. They view it as the ultimate loyalty assurance. He pulled up a scan of Jace and Lisi's biosignatures, but, Core said, a grin spreading across his scarred face. They made a mistake with you two. What mistake? Lisi asked. Usually, the bond is hierarchical, Core said. One dominant, one submissive. It makes the command structure easy to hack. But look at this. He pointed to 2 sine waves on the screen. They were perfectly identical, mirroring each other in amplitude and frequency. You triggered the artifact to save her, Core said to Jace. You risked your life with 0 expectation of reward. That intent, it altered the bonding matrix. He looked at Lisi, and you accepted the bond not out of duty, but out of desperation to save him back. Core slammed his hand on the console. It is symmetrical. It is a closed loop. They cannot hijack this. If they try to send a command signal into your bond, the feedback loop between 2 equals will fry their transmitter. You are not a tool. You are a glitch, a virus in their system. Lisi looked at Jace, hope warring with fear in her eyes. So we can fight them? You can destroy their whole plan, Core said. But there is a catch. There is always a catch. Jace sighed. The bond is currently in stage 1. Core said, surface level, stabilized, but not locked. To make it weapon-proof, to make it truly unbreakable so they cannot surgically separate you or chemically suppress it, you have to consummate it. Jace felt the heat rise in his cheeks. Lisi went very still. Physically? Jace asked. And emotionally? Core said seriously. Complete vulnerability. No barriers. You have to let the bond merge your psyches completely. And if we do? Lisi asked. Then you are one entity in 2 bodies. Forever, Core said. If you ever try to separate after that, the psychic tear will likely lobotomize you both. You will never be alone inside your own head again. Silence descended on the lab, heavy and suffocating. I need air, Lisi said abruptly. She turned and walked out the airlock, disappearing behind the waterfall. Jace waited a beat, then looked at Core. Go, the scientist said, waving a hand. Discuss your destiny. I have to decrypt these comms intercepts. Jace found her on a stone balcony carved into the cliff face, overlooking the jungle canopy. The twin moons of Virel 3 hung huge and pale in the sky, bathing everything in silver light. Lisi was leaning against the stone railing, staring out at the wilderness. She looked small against the vastness of the alien horizon. Jace stood beside her, not touching her, but close enough that the bond hummed contentedly. Forever is a long time, Jace said softly. Lisi gripped the stone railing until her knuckles turned white. It is not the time that scares me. Jace, it is the silence. The silence? I have spent my whole life training to be a leader, Lisi said, her voice trembling. To be strong, to be alone. If I do this, if I let you all the way in, I will never be just Lysithra again. I will be half of us. She turned to him, her eyes fierce and wet. And you are a scavenger. You value your freedom above everything. You hate debt. You hate being tied down. This is the ultimate debt. Jace looked out at the jungle. She was right. He had spent his life running from attachments because attachments meant loss. You are right, Jace said. I am terrified. I like my head being my own. I like not knowing what someone else is feeling every second of the day. He turned to face her. But then I think about the alternative. The committee hunting us, being cut open in a lab, or just going back to Helix 9 and being alone in that salvage bay. He reached out, his hand hovering over hers on the railing. You called me clay, Jace said, fragile. But you know what? You are the one who is scared of breaking. You are terrified that if you need someone, it makes you weak. Lisi looked down at his hand. I am weak, she whispered. Around you, I lose my edge. No, Jace said firmly. You do not. I saw you in that auction hall. I saw you on the ship. You are the strongest thing I have ever met. But you are lonely. Lisi. God, you are so lonely, son. I can feel it. He placed his hand over hers. I am not asking you to give up your soul, Jace said. I am asking you to share the load. Lisi looked up, a tear tracking through the soot on her cheek. You are a fool, she said again, but the venom was gone. I know. Jace smiled. Lisi took a breath, her resolve hardening. Her hand turned over, gripping his fingers. I think, she began. A laser bolt shattered the stone railing inches from Jace's hip. Stone fragments sprayed into the air. Jace threw himself flat, dragging Lisi down with him as a volley of plasma fire lit up the balcony. Get down, Jace yelled. Mercenaries, Lisi roared, her eyes instantly shifting to gold. They were swarming up the cliff face, armored figures with jetpacks, rising from the mist of the waterfall. The committee had found them. We are cut off, Jace shouted, looking at the airlock. 3 mercenaries were already blocking the door to the lab. Lisi looked at the jungle canopy below, a drop of 50 feet to the nearest thick branch. Get on, Lisi commanded, crouching low. What? Get on my back, now! There was no time to argue. Jace scrambled onto her back, wrapping his arms around her neck and his legs around her waist. Hold tight, Lisi yelled. She leaped. Jace screamed as they plummeted off the balcony. The wind rushed past his ears. For a second, he thought they were going to die on the jungle floor. Then, Lisi's claws sank into the bark of a massive tree limb. The impact jarred Jace's teeth, but Lisi absorbed the shock with her legs. She did not stop. She propelled them forward, bounding from branch to branch with a power that was terrifying. She was fully shifted now, not the humanoid form, but the hybrid war form. Fur rippled along her arms, her muscles bunched and released like coiled steel. She moved with a speed that blurred the world. Jace buried his face in the fur at her shoulder, the bond flooding him with her sensations, the bite of the bark, the thrill of the hunt, the absolute predatory joy of movement. Behind them, jetpacks whined, but the mercenaries could not navigate the dense canopy like a lycanthari. Faster, Jace yelled, the terror in his chest transmuting into a wild, manic exhilaration. Go left. Lisi banked left, trusting his eyes as much as her own. They were a single organism, pilot and engine, navigator and beast. They lost the pursuers 3 miles deep in the jungle, diving into a hidden cave system behind a curtain of hanging vines. Lisi collapsed on the damp stone floor of the cave, sliding Jace off her back. She shifted back to her humanoid form, gasping for air, her clothes torn, her hair wild. Jace hit the ground hard, rolling onto his back. He was laughing. It was a breathless, hysterical sound. That Jace gasped, pointing a finger at the ceiling. That was insane. Do not ever do that again. Can we do it again? Lisi let out a dry chuckle, rolling over to face him. Her eyes were fading from gold back to violet. You are heavy, she complained, but she was smiling. The adrenaline began to crash. The cold of the cave seeped in. The Bond, sensing the drop in threat, began to panic, demanding reassurance. Jace shivered. Lisi crawled toward him, driven by the instinct. They huddled together against the cave wall, soaked from the mist. Shivering. Lisi wrapped her cloak around both of them. Jace turned to her. They were inches apart. He could see the dilation of her pupils. He could feel the frantic beating of her heart against his chest. The argument on the balcony felt like a lifetime ago. The words were still hanging in the air, unresolved, but the reality of their survival was louder. Jace reached up, his fingers trembling as he traced the glowing sigil on her collarbone. The light of the mark pulsed under his touch. We did not finish the conversation, Jace whispered. Lisi leaned her forehead against his. Her breath was warm on his face. Not yet, she whispered back. We survive first. We break the committee. Then we decide. Jace closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. The Bond settled, turning from a scream to a steady, warm hum. Deal, he breathed. He did not kiss her. It was too much, too soon, and the stakes were too high. Instead, he just held her. And for the first time since the auction, the silence in his head did not feel lonely. It felt full. Aegis Prime was not a space station. It was a statement. Suspended in the high orbit of a gas giant that painted the void with swirls of amethyst and gold. The station looked like a diamond cut by a jeweler with a god complex. It was all spiraling glass spires, rotating habitation rings, and docking bays that glowed with the pristine, clinical white of a surgical theater. Jace Rios stood in the airlock of the shuttle they had stolen, or rather commandeered with high-level diplomatic override codes provided by Dr. Kaur, and adjusted the collar of his tunic. The tunic was stiff, midnight blue, and cost more than Jace's entire salvage career earnings. It itched. You are fidgeting, Lisi said. She was standing behind him, checking the reflection of her armor in the polished bulkhead. She had not abandoned her combat gear, but she had draped a ceremonial sash of silver silk over it, signifying her status as a clan heir. The contrast between the deadly battered plating and the elegant fabric was striking. It made her look like a sword wrapped in velvet. I am not fidgeting, Jace said, smoothing the fabric for the 10th time. I am exfoliating. This fabric is actually sandpaper in disguise. Are you sure this is going to work? It will work because they expect it to work, Lisi said. Her voice was calm, but the Bond humming in Jace's mind told a different story. She was coiled tight, a spring ready to snap. She felt like she was walking into a trap, but she was doing it anyway because the alternative was running forever. We are the anomaly, she reminded him. They want to study us. They want to see if the prototype works. So we give them a show. The airlock hissed open. They were greeted not by guards, but by a reception committee of protocol droids and low-level functionaries. The corridor beyond was vast, lined with floating gardens where bioengineered orchards grew in zero-gravity spheres. The air smelled of artificial jasmine and aggressive cleanliness. Jace stepped out, and Lisi was instantly on him. She moved into his personal space with a fluidity that looked possessive to the observers but felt calculated to Jace. She wrapped her arm through his, her fingers interlacing with his so tightly her claws pressed against his knuckles. She leaned her head down, inhaling deeply near his neck, her nose brushing his pulse point. A gasp rippled through the reception committee, A human diplomat in a gray suit looked scandalized. "Ignore them," Lisi murmured against his skin, her lips moving barely enough to be seen. "I am mapping the security grid. There is a biometric scanner in the ceiling. Look flustered." Jace swallowed, his face heating up. That part did not require acting. Having a lethal alien warrior nuzzle his neck in front of 20 dignitaries was genuinely disorienting. "I love it when you breathe on me," Jace said loud enough for the diplomats to hear, his voice cracking perfectly. "It is very grounding." He looked at the diplomats and gave a weak, apologetic smile. "She gets separation anxiety," Jace explained, patting Lisi's hand. "The bond, you know. Very intense." Lisi let out a low, possessive rumble that vibrated through Jace's chest. She lifted her head, her golden eyes sweeping over the committee with a look that dared them to comment. "Take us to High Counselor Valerius," she commanded. "Now." The journey to the summit hall was a masterclass in uncomfortable theater. They were led through gleaming concourses filled with the galaxy's elite, politicians in shimmer suits, alien matriarchs in floating palanquins, and military officers with chests full of medals. Every time they passed a security node, Lisi would engage in a display of uncontrollable affection. She would stop to fix Jace's collar, her body shielding him from the cameras while Jace used a micro-transmitter in his cuff to upload the virus Core had written. At the entrance to the turbolift, she pinned him against the glass wall, her hands on his chest, staring deeply into his eyes. "Security camera at 2 o'clock, she whispered, "Uploading loop now." "You are really enjoying this, aren't you?" Jace whispered back, his hands resting awkwardly on her waist. "You smell like terror and cheap soap," she replied dryly. "Hold still." She leaned in as if to kiss him, her hair creating a curtain of privacy. "Done," she said, pulling back as the lift doors opened. The doors revealed a private observation deck at the spire's peak. The view was breathtaking. The gas giant filled the sky, but the room was cold. Standing by the window was a figure who dominated the space without moving. High Counselor Valerius turned. Lisi's father was a monolith of a lycanthari. He was taller than Lisi, his shoulders broad enough to block out the stars. His face was a map of old scars, and his eyes were the same silver violet as his daughter's. But where hers held fire, his held only ice. "Father," Lisi said. Her voice was steel. Valerius did not look at her. He looked at Jace. He looked at the human engineer with a mixture of confusion and profound disappointment. "So," Valerius said, his voice a deep baritone that seemed to suck the air out of the room. "This is the variable." He walked forward, his boots clicking on the obsidian floor. He stopped in front of Jace, towering over him. "I expected a soldier," Valerius said, "or perhaps a politician, someone with ambition. Instead, the universe gives me a mechanic. I prefer salvage engineer," Jace said, holding his ground despite every instinct screaming at him to run. "And the universe didn't give me to you. I sort of volunteered. Accidentally," Lisi added quickly. Valerius turned his gaze to his daughter. "You think you are clever, Lysithra," he said, "running off, bonding with this creature. You think you have ruined my plans, haven't I?" Lisi challenged. "The relic is gone. The bond is active, and you cannot use it for your treaty now." Valerius laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "You foolish child. The relic was never about the treaty. It was about leverage." He gestured to the window, to the fleet of ships gathering outside. "I orchestrated the theft," Valerius revealed. "I hired the mercenaries. I wanted the relic to be found by you. But you were supposed to be intercepted by Admiral Vance's son. A strategic bonding. A union that would have cemented our alliance with the human military faction for the next century." Jace blinked. "Wait. You wanted to arrange a marriage by kidnapping? It is efficient, Valerius said coldly. A bond with a high-ranking human officer would have made you a queen. Lysithra, a symbol of power. Instead, you bonded with a nobody, a glitch in the code. Jace felt Lisi's rage spike through the bond like a hot needle. I am not a symbol, Lisi snarled, and I am not a broodmare for your political alliances. Valerius sneered. You are what I made you, and since you have flawed the product, we will have to repurpose it. The doors to the observation deck slid open again. A human man walked in. He was sleek, wearing a suit that cost more than the station they were standing on. He had a smile that did not reach his eyes. Senator Corvin, Jace said, recognizing the face from the propaganda feeds. Mr. Rios, Corvin said smoothly, and the Lady Lysithra. So glad you could join us. We were just discussing the demonstration. Corvin tapped a control on the wall. A holographic display sprang to life in the center of the room. It showed a map of the galaxy. But instead of trade routes, it showed a web of connecting lights, thousands of them. We call it the Harmony Grid, Corvin said, walking through the hologram. Peace is fragile, he continued. Emotions are volatile. Fear, anger, rebellion, these things cause wars. But what if we could dampen them? What if we could link key individuals, leaders, generals, influencers into a shared emotional network? A network anchored by bonded pairs who act as regulators. Jace stared at the map. You want to use the bond to lobotomize people? We want to use it to harmonize them, Corvin corrected. If a population starts to feel unrest, the bonded anchors transmit a wave of calm. If a soldier feels fear, the network injects courage or obedience. And you two, Valerius said, stepping next to Corvin, are the prototype. Your bond is unique, powerful. It will be the keystone of the entire system. We will never help you, Lisi said, her hands curling into fists. Corvin smiled. He looked past them toward the door. I did not think you would volunteer, Corvin said. That is why we brought insurance. A woman stepped out of the shadows near the entrance. She was wearing a dress uniform of the Integration Oversight Committee security forces. She held a heavy stun baton loosely in one hand. Jace felt his stomach drop. Rhea, he breathed, the security officer who had given them the codes, who had pointed them to the freighter. Hello, Rios, Rhea said. Her face was blank, professional. You set us up, Jace said. The cafe, the freighter. You sent us to Core? We knew you would run, Rhea said with a shrug. We just needed to make sure you ran in the right direction. We needed you to fully activate the bond before you got here. Stress testing. She raised the baton. Take them, Corvin ordered. Jace moved to fight, but he was an engineer, not a soldier. Rhea was fast. She fired a neural disruptor from her wrist. Jace saw the blue flash. He felt the bond scream in warning, but his body wouldn't move. His knees hit the floor. Beside him, he heard Lisi roar, a sound of pure fury, before the heavy hum of a containment field slammed down on her. The last thing Jace saw was Lisi crashing against an invisible wall, reaching for him before the darkness took him. Cold, wet, silence. Jace woke up in a void. There was no light. There was no sound. The air was damp and smelled of mildew. He reached out, his hand brushing against slimy, cold stone. A sensory deprivation cell. The oldest trick in the book. Break the mind by giving it nothing to feed on. Jace sat up, his breath hitching. Panic fluttered in his chest. He was alone. For the first time in days, he was physically alone, but he wasn't. Deep in the back of his mind, there was a thrumming ache, a connection. It was faint, attenuated by distance or technology, but it was there. Lisi. He closed his eyes, focusing on the ache. He didn't try to think words, he just reached out with his feelings. What came back nearly crushed him. It was a tidal wave of guilt. He felt Lisi's self-hatred, it was a black, swirling vortex. She was blaming herself. I did this. I dragged him here. He is going to die because of me. I am a monster. I am a trap. He felt her rage, impotent and burning, directed entirely inward. She was in pain, physical pain, but the emotional agony was worse. She believed she had destroyed him. Jace gritted his teeth, pressing his forehead against the cold, wet wall of his cell. No, he thought. No, you don't get to do that. He focused on the bond. He poured everything he had into it. Not fear, not anger, stubbornness. Hey, he projected. Hey, space dog, listen to me. He felt a flicker of surprise from the void, a pause in the storm of guilt. I am here, Jace thought, visualizing the words as if he were writing them in neon letters. And I am not a victim. Stop pitying me. The response was a jagged spike of sorrow. I broke you. I marked you. I marked you back, Jace countered. He thought about the salvage bay. He thought about the moment he slammed his hand on the relic. He showed her the memory, not of fear, but of the split-second decision. I saw you, he projected. I saw someone who was going to die alone, and I decided, not fate, not biology, I decided that wasn't going to happen. He felt the bond tremble. I chose this. Lisi, Jace whispered into the dark, tears pricking his eyes. I chose you. I am exactly where I want to be. I am not going anywhere. In the sterile white hell of the high science lab. Lysithra was screaming. She was strapped to a vertical restraint frame, a cruciform of silver metal that suspended her in the center of the room. Thick cables were attached to the sigils on her collarbones and arms, pulsing with light as they tried to siphon the energy of the bond. Scientists in hazmat suits moved around her, adjusting dials, ignoring her cries of agony. Senator Corvin watched from behind a glass wall. The output is chaotic, a technician reported, looking at a data pad. The bond is resisting the extraction. The subject is fighting the integration. Lisi snarled, straining against the restraints. The metal bit into her skin. She felt like she was being flayed alive, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the hollowness in her chest. She had lost him. She had gotten him killed. Then she heard it. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling. A warmth that started in her arm and spread to her chest, defying the cold machinery hooked into her. I chose you. The voice was clear. It was Jace. It was his stubborn, annoying, brave voice. Lisi went still. Her panting breath slowed. The scientist paused, noticing the sudden drop in her vitals. Is she crashing? Corvin asked over the intercom. No, the technician said, frowning. Her heart rate is synchronizing. Lisi closed her eyes. She stopped fighting the restraints. She stopped fighting the pain. Instead, she reached for that warmth. She reached for him. She saw his memory, and she saw herself through his eyes, not as a monster, not as a political pawn, but as something beautiful and wild that deserved to be saved. The guilt shattered. It didn't disappear, but it broke apart, replaced by a fierce, burning clarity. He wasn't a victim, he was her partner, and he was fighting. You are an idiot, she sent back. It was a thought wrapped in fierce affection. I know, came the reply. Now get us out of here. Lisi opened her eyes. The gold in her irises was no longer molten. It was solid, bright as a star. Turn it up, she whispered. What? The technician asked. Leaning in, I said. Lisi smiled, revealing her fangs. Turn it up. She didn't wait. She pulled on the bond, but she didn't pull for strength. She pulled for him. She opened every gate, every barrier she had built to protect her own ego, her own fear of intimacy. She let him all the way in. The consummation Dr. Kaur had talked about, it wasn't about sex. It was about surrender, in the dark cell. Jace gasped as the connection slammed open. In the lab, Lisi arched her back. They were no longer in two different places. They were occupying the same psychic space. Jace felt the cold metal of the restraints on his wrists. Lisi felt the damp stone on her cheek. They felt the rhythm of each other's hearts, beating out of sync for a second. And then, thump, 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 perfectly aligned. It was an embrace that defied physics. Jace felt phantom arms around him, strong and protective. Lisi felt hands cupping her face, gentle and grounding. They were interlocked, soul to soul. The energy in the lab spiked. "Sir," the technician yelled, "the readings! They are going off the scale. The symmetry. It's creating a feedback loop." The cables attached to Lisi began to smoke. The blue light in the tubes turned blinding white. "Disconnect her," Corvin shouted. "Too late," Lisi whispered. She threw her head back and let the bond roar. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was a command. The surge of energy exploded outward from her body. The control consoles sparked and blew out, showering the scientists in glass. The lights in the ceiling shattered. The restraint frame groaned. The algorithms designed to control fear and pain could not handle a signal composed of absolute, unshakable trust. The math broke, with a sound like a gunshot. The metal cuff holding Lisi's right arm snapped. She tore her arm free, and she grabbed the cable attached to her collarbone and ripped it out, ignoring the spray of blood. She dropped to the floor, landing in a crouch. The scientists were scrambling back, terrified. Lisi looked up. Her body was shifting, bones cracking and reshaping, fur erupting along her spine. But it wasn't the chaotic, painful transformation of the auction. It was smooth, controlled. She stood up, growing taller, her armor stretching to accommodate the war form. Her face elongated, the muzzle forming, the ears sharpening. Her tail swept the air behind her. She was 7 feet of armored wolf, glowing with the bioluminescence of the sigils that now burned brighter than the station's emergency lights. She looked at the glass wall where Corvin stood frozen. She did not howl. She spoke, her voice a deep, distorted growl that vibrated the very deck plates. "Mine." She turned and sprinted toward the door. She hit the blast steel with her shoulder, and the door crumpled like tin foil. In his cell, Jace stood up. The door to his prison sparked and slid open, the electronic lock fried by the station-wide power surge. He stepped out into the corridor, rubbing his arm. He could feel her coming. He could feel the exact direction, the exact distance. He grinned, though his hands were shaking. "Good girl," he whispered. He started running toward the rendezvous point. The station was in chaos. Alarms were blaring. Smoke filled the air. But Jace wasn't afraid. He had a map in his head, and at the center of it was a wolf who would tear the galaxy apart to get to him. And he would do the exact same thing for her. The alarm klaxons on Aegis Prime were not designed to inspire panic. They were designed to enforce order. They pulsed with a rhythmic, authoritarian thrum that vibrated through the floor plates, a heartbeat of synthesized control. But inside Sector 4, order had been eviscerated. Lysithra moved through the pristine white corridor like a stroke of calligraphy on a blank page, dark, fluid, and violent. She was in her war form, a towering fusion of Lycanthari biology and armored plating. Her muzzle was elongated, teeth bared in a permanent silent snarl, and her fur stood on end, crackling with the static discharge of the broken containment field. She did not run so much as flow. A squad of security drones, hovering orbs of chrome and weaponry, banked around the corner to intercept her. Their targeting lasers painted red dots across her chest. Lisi did not slow down. She dropped to all fours, her claws gouging deep furrows into the ceramic decking, and launched herself off the wall. She was a blur of kinetic energy. She swiped the first drone out of the air, crushing its chassis like an aluminum can before it could fire. She used the momentum to spin, her tail, heavy with muscle and armor, whipping around to smash the second drone into the bulkhead. The third drone fired. A plasma bolt scorched the air, singing the fur on her shoulder. Lisi landed, skidding on the polished floor, and roared. It was a sound that bypassed the ears and rattled the teeth. The drone's sensors glitched from the sheer acoustic pressure. In that second of hesitation, she was on it, tearing the weapon arm free with a shriek of tearing metal. She left the wreckage sparking behind her and kept moving. She was not killing. That was the most terrifying thing about her rampage. She dismantled machines with prejudice, but when she encountered human guards or terrified station staff, she simply bypassed them. She moved too fast for them to track, a shadow that bowled them over or leaped over their heads. The bond was a compass in her mind. It was pulling her deeper into the station, down toward the engineering levels. It was a golden thread in a labyrinth of gray steel. She could feel Jace. He was moving. He was alive. He was afraid, but not for himself. He was afraid she would get hurt coming to get him. Idiot, she thought, the word a growl in her throat. I am the one with the claws. But the bond let her feel his environment. She saw flashes of what he saw, dark tunnels, steam pipes, the flicker of a classic keypad bypass. Jace Rios was doing what he did best. He was breaking things to make them work for him. 3 levels down, inside a narrow maintenance shaft that smelled of grease and recycled water. Jace was cursing. Come on, you piece of overpriced junk, Jace muttered, jamming a stripped wire into the exposed circuitry of a blast door control panel. He was working by the light of his wrist pad. He had escaped the cell by shorting the magnetic lock with a coil of copper wire he had scavenged from a broken wall panel. Never underestimate the utility of a loose panel in a government facility. But the station was on full lockdown. Every door was sealed. The wire sparked. Jace hissed as the heat singed his fingertips. But the heavy steel door groaned and slid open a few inches, enough for a skinny engineer. He squeezed through the gap, scraping his ribs, and tumbled into the next corridor. This was the service underbelly of Aegis Prime, the gritty reality hidden behind the gleaming diplomatic halls. It was dark, loud with the roar of air circulators, and mercifully free of cameras. He paused, leaning against the wall to catch his breath. The bond flared. It was not a subtle sensation. It was like standing next to a blast furnace door when it opened. Lisi was close. He could feel her rage, a cold and precise instrument, and underneath it, a desperate, hungry need to find him. Jace closed his eyes. He pushed back against the bond, sending a mental image of his location. Big turbine, yellow warning stripes. Sounds like a dying washing machine. He felt her acknowledge it, a pulse of affirmation that nearly knocked him over. He started running again. His destination was the central maintenance hub, the junction point where the service shafts intersected with the main power conduits. It was the only place wide enough for her to fit if she was still in the big form. He rounded a corner and skidded to a halt. 2 guards were standing by the hub entrance. They were not standard security. They wore the matte black armor of the committee's elite kill teams. They raised their rifles the moment they saw him. Target acquired, one said, his voice amplified by a helmet speaker. Jace threw his hands up. Whoa, easy. I am just the janitor. I got lost. Very lost. On the ground, the guard commanded. Jace dropped to his knees, his mind racing. He calculated the distance, 20 feet, too far to rush them. He looked at the steam pipe running along the ceiling above them. If he could throw his wrench. No. He would be dead before his arm moved. The guard tightened his finger on the trigger. Then the ceiling vent behind the guards exploded. It rained metal grating and dust. A massive, dark shape dropped from the darkness, landing silently despite its weight. The guards spun around. Lisi rose from her crouch. She was magnificent and terrifying. Her eyes were burning gold searchlights in the gloom. The bioluminescent sigils on her shoulders and chest were pulsing with a violent violet light, illuminating the fear on the guards' faces. She did not roar this time. She just exhaled, a low hiss that sounded like escaping steam. The guards opened fire. Lisi moved. She swatted the first rifle barrel aside with a clawed hand, the kinetic rounds sparking harmlessly off her armored forearm. She grabbed the guard by the chest plate and threw him, not into a wall, but down the corridor, sliding him away from Jace. The second guard tried to bring his weapon to bear, but Lisi was already inside his guard. She headbutted him, her armored forehead slamming into his helmet. The guard crumpled like a sack of wet laundry. Silence returned to the corridor, broken only by the distant wail of alarms. Lisi stood over the unconscious guards, her chest heaving. Steam rose from her fur. She turned slowly to face Jace. Jace stayed on his knees. He looked up at her. She was huge. Her muzzle was stained with hydraulic fluid from some destroyed drone. Her claws were long enough to eviscerate him with a twitch. She looked like every nightmare humanity had ever told about the dark between the stars. The Bond was screaming at him, "Predator! Danger! Run!" But Jace looked into her eyes. The gold was swirling, chaotic, but behind it, he saw the silver violet he knew. He saw the woman who had curled up on the floor of a freighter because she was cold. Lisi took a step toward him. She made a low, questioning sound in her throat, a whimper that seemed impossible coming from a creature that size. She was waiting for him to flinch. She was waiting for him to see a monster. Jace stood up slowly. He did not back away. He walked toward her. "You are late," Jace said softly. He reached out. Lisi flinched, expecting a blow or a weapon. But Jace laid his hand flat against the side of her muzzle. Her fur was coarse, hot as a fever. He could feel the massive jaw muscles trembling under his palm. He stepped closer, wrapping his arms as far as they would go around her thick, armored neck. He pressed his face into the fur at her throat. "You are beautiful," Jace whispered into the Bond, meaning it with every cell in his body. "You are terrifying, space dog, and you are mine." Lisi shuddered. A tension she had been carrying for 20 years, the fear of her own nature, snapped. She slumped against him, her weight forcing him to brace his legs. She let out a long, shuddering breath that ruffled his hair. Then, the shift began. It was not painful this time. It was a fluid retraction of mass. Bones realigned, fur receded, armor plating shifted back to its compact state. In seconds, Jace was holding the human-sized Lisi. She was sweating, her face streaked with grime, her eyes wide and human again. She gripped his tunic, pulling him down. "Shut up," she gasped. She kissed him. It was not the tentative, frightened kiss from the cargo bay. This was a collision. It was desperate, hungry, and absolute. Jace's hands tangled in her hair, pulling the silver rings free. Lisi's arms locked around his neck, holding him like he was the only gravity in the universe. They kissed against the humming machinery of the maintenance hub, ignoring the alarms, ignoring the war they had started. It was a reclaiming. It was a seal. The Bond flared between them, No longer a jagged, accidental thing, but a smooth, unbreakable circuit. It felt like coming home. Lisi pulled back, breathless, her forehead resting against his. Her eyes were shining. "We are in so much trouble," she whispered, a fierce grin tugging at her mouth. "Oh, catastrophic amounts," Jace agreed, wiping a smudge of oil from her cheek. "We should probably go burn it all down." Lisi laughed, a bright sound in the dark corridor. "Lead the way, engineer." The Harmony Grid Core was the beating heart of the conspiracy, and it was undeniably impressive. Using the stolen schematics Dr. X's core had uploaded to Jace's wristpad, they navigated the service ladders up to the station's apex. They burst through a final access hatch and found themselves on a narrow gantry overlooking the core chamber. It was a vast, spherical room, easily 300 feet across. In the center, suspended by magnetic fields, was the grid itself, a lattice of crystalline nodes connected by beams of pure energy. It looked like a neuron map of a god. It hummed with a sound that vibrated in the marrow of Jace's bones. The Bond did not like it. The moment they entered the chamber, the sigils on Jace's arm and Lisi's collarbone flared with angry heat. The grid was broadcasting a carrier wave designed to suppress and control, and their Bond was fighting it like an immune system fighting a virus. "It feels like static," Lisi hissed, rubbing her temples, like someone screaming underwater. "That is the suppression field," Jace said, checking his wristpad. "It is waiting for the master signal. It is waiting for us." Down below, on the central platform that extended into the heart of the sphere, a group of figures was waiting. Senator Corvin stood in the center, flanked by Rhea and Lisi's father, Valerius. A ring of heavy assault droids surrounded the platform, their weapons trained on the gantry where Jace and Lisi stood. A holographic projection of Corvin's face appeared in the air in front of them, giant and composed. "Please, come down," Corvin's voice boomed, echoing off the spherical walls. "There is no need for more violence. You have proven your point." Lisi looked at Jace. He nodded. They descended the access ramp, walking side by side, hands brushing. They stepped onto the central platform, surrounded by the humming lattice of the grid. Corvin smiled. He looked unruffled by the destruction Lisi had caused. If anything, he looked pleased. "Magnificent," Corvin said, looking at Lisi. "The energy readings from your escape were off the charts. You are stronger than we calculated. Both of you." He gestured to the grid surrounding them. "This network is hungry for a power source like that. We are not a battery." "Corvin," Jace said, his voice steady despite the trembling of his legs. "And we are not your puppets." "No!" Valerius stepped forward, his heavy boots ringing on the metal. "You are children playing with fire." Lisi's father looked at her with cold appraisal. He ignored Jace entirely. "You have embarrassed me, Lysithra," Valerius said. "But you can still be useful." He pointed to the control pedestal in the center of the platform. "Submit," Valerius commanded. "Connect to the grid. Become the anchor. If you do this, you will be heroes. We will paint you as the tragic lovers who united the galaxy. You will live in palaces. You will have wealth, safety, and each other." "And if we refuse?" Lisi asked, her voice quiet. "Then I will let Corvin take the dampeners off," Valerius said indifferently. "They will scour your mind until there is nothing left but the Bond reflexes. You will be a biological component. And I will tell the clans that the humans corrupted you, and that you died a traitor." He leaned in, his silver-violet eyes boring into hers. "Love is a luxury, daughter. Survival is a duty. Choose." Lisi flinched. Jace felt her waver. It wasn't the threat of death that shook her. It was the rejection. It was the confirmation that her father truly saw her as nothing more than an asset. She looked at the droids. She looked at Rhea, whose face was a mask of stoic conflict. She looked at the grid, humming with its promise of enforced peace. Jace squeezed her hand. He stepped forward, placing himself between Lisi and her father. He looked small next to the Lycanthari warlord. He was just a human in a torn flight suit with a wrench in his belt. "You talk a lot about duty for a guy selling his own people into slavery," Jace said. Valerius snarled. "Do not speak to me, scavenger." "I am speaking to everyone," Jace said. He turned to Corvin. "You want a demonstration? You want to show the galaxy what a bonded pair can do?" Jace walked to the control pedestal. The interface was glowing blue, waiting for a connection. "Jace, what are you doing?" Lisi whispered, panic spiking in the bond. "Trust me," Jace said. He looked up at the cameras that were broadcasting this summit to every system in the sector. "My name is Jace Rios," he said, his voice amplified by the room's acoustics. "I am a salvage engineer, and I accidentally claimed a Lycanthari highborn." He looked at Lisi and smiled. "They told us this bond is dangerous. They told us it needs to be controlled. They want to use it to make you feel what they want you to feel." He raised his marked arm. "But a bond is not a chain," Jace said. "It is a choice. You cannot harmonize people by taking away their voice. That is not peace. That is just a quiet prison." He looked Corvin in the eye. "And we are not going to be your lock. We are the key." Jace slammed his arm onto the interface panel. "Now! Lisi!" Jace shouted. Lisi understood instantly. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed Jace's other hand and slammed her own marked palm onto the panel next to his. The contact was electric. Jace screamed as the grid tried to pull energy from him. It tried to force his mind into a box of compliance. It tried to make him feel calm, obedient, passive. But he had Lisi. Through the bond, she poured her fire into him, her rage, her love, her defiance. "Push it back," she roared in his mind. Dr. Kor had said their bond was symmetrical, a closed loop of equals. The grid was designed for a hierarchy, a master and a slave. It didn't know how to handle two masters. Jace and Lisi didn't accept the input. They reversed the polarity. They took the massive carrier wave of the harmony grid and used it as a megaphone. "Upload it all," Jace thought, triggering the file Kor had hidden in his wrist pad. The data stream hit the grid. The humming sound in the chamber changed pitch. It went from a soothing drone to a chaotic shriek. The energy beams turned from blue to a violent, strobing gold. On the holographic screens above, the map of the galaxy vanished. In its place, documents began to scroll, thousands of them. Video files played in the air, Senator Corvin discussing acceptable casualty rates for the mind control experiments. Audio recordings of Valerius agreeing to suppress Lycanthari independence in exchange for a seat on the High Council. Blackmail files on admirals. The blueprints of the mental enslavement protocols. It was all being broadcast, not just to the room, but through the grid's transmitters to every ship, every station, and every personal device connected to the network in the system. "Stop it!" Corvin screamed, his composure shattering. "Cut the feed! Rhea, kill them!" Rhea stepped forward, raising her rifle. She aimed it at Jace's back. Jace didn't turn around. He couldn't. He was locked in the feedback loop, his body arching with the strain of holding the connection open. Rhea looked at the screens. She saw a memo with her own name on it, authorizing her termination once the project was complete. She looked at Jace and Lisi, glowing with shared light, suffering together to tell the truth. She looked at Corvin, who was red-faced and spitting orders. Rhea lowered her rifle. "No," she said. What? Corvin gasped. I said no, Rhea repeated. She turned the rifle on Corvin. The security droids, confused by the conflicting commands and the chaos in the network, froze. Valerius stared at the screen, watching his secret dealings scrolling for the entire galaxy to see. He realized, with dawning horror, that his political life was over. He looked at his daughter. Lisi was glowing. She looked like a goddess of judgment. She met his eyes, and through the bond, she projected a single devastating thought that he felt in his bones. You underestimated us. The grid overloaded. A shockwave of psychic pressure exploded from the core. The glass of the observation deck shattered. Sparks showered from the ceiling like rain. Jace and Lisi were thrown backward, blasting away from the pedestal. They tumbled across the platform, tangled together, and skidded to a stop near the edge. The humming died. The lights in the grid flickered and went dark. Silence fell over the chamber, heavy and ringing. Jace lay on his back, gasping for air. His arm felt numb. He blinked, trying to clear the spots from his vision. He felt a hand on his chest. Lisi was pushing herself up, looking down at him. Her hair was a mess, her sash was torn, and she was smiling. Did we win? Jace wheezed. Lisi looked up. Corvin was on his knees, hands raised as Rhea held him at gunpoint. Valerius was backing away into the shadows. But station security guards, the regular humans, not the Black Ops team, were blocking his path, looking at him with disgust. We broke the silence, Lisi whispered. Jace laughed, a painful, hacking sound. Good, he said, closing his eyes. I hate quiet. Lisi leaned down and kissed his forehead. Stay with me, Jace, she commanded softly, her hand gripping his tightly. We are not done yet. Jace squeezed her hand back. I told you, space dog, he murmured, drifting into exhaustion. I am not going anywhere. The chaos on Aegis Prime was not the mindless panic of a riot. It was the deafening roar of a paradigm shattering. The data Jace and Lisi had unleashed did not just reveal a crime. It dismantled a worldview. Inside the vast spherical chamber of the Harmony grid, the air was thick with the smell of ozone and the shouting of 1,000 voices. The holographic screens that lined the walls, once displaying sterilized maps of a peaceful galaxy, now scrolled through the dirty laundry of the Integration Oversight Committee. Audio files of Senator Corvin laughing about expendable assets played on a loop, overlapping with video footage of Lycanthari clan leaders shaking hands with human arms dealers. On the central platform, suspended over the abyss of the grid's energy core, Jace Rios leaned against the control pedestal, his chest heaving. His arm felt like it had been dipped in liquid nitrogen, a cold burn that radiated all the way to his shoulder. Beside him, Lysithra stood like a sentinel carved from obsidian and starlight. Her armor was scorched, her sash torn, but she held her head high, her golden eyes scanning the turmoil erupting on the gantries above them. They are not retreating, Lisi shouted over the din. Jace looked up. The security forces were fracturing. The matte black armored kill squads loyal to Corvin were trying to secure the exits. But the station's regular security, humans and aliens who had just watched their own death warrants scroll across the screens, were turning their weapons on them. Delegates in expensive suits were shoving each other, some trying to flee to their shuttles, others screaming for answers. We did not just open a door, Jace yelled back, gripping the edge of the console to stay upright. We blew the whole wall off the house. The blast doors on the far side of the chamber hissed open. A hush rippled through the immediate area, cutting through the noise like a knife. High Counselor Valerius walked onto the gantry overlooking their platform. He was not running. He was not shouting. He moved with the terrifying, deliberate grace of a predator who knows he has lost the hunt but refuses to lose his dignity. He was flanked by two members of his personal honor guard, but they looked uncertain, their weapons lowered. Valerius stopped at the railing, looking down at his daughter and the human scavenger standing beside her. The lights of the dying grid reflected in his silver-violet eyes. "You have set the galaxy on fire, Lysithra," Valerius said. His voice was not amplified, but in the sudden quiet of the central chamber, it carried effortlessly. "I lit a torch." "Father," Lisi replied, her voice steady. "You were the one who filled the room with gas." Valerius gripped the railing, his claws digging into the metal. "You speak of freedom," he scoffed, his gaze flickering with contempt. "But look around you. Chaos. Fear. The grid was order. It was survival. Do you think these people can govern themselves? Do you think the humans will not turn on us the moment they feel safe?" He gestured to the scrolling data. "I did what was necessary to ensure the Lycanthari survived the next century. I made us essential. I made us the spine of the new world. And you have broken the spine because you fell in love with a stray dog." Jace bristled, opening his mouth to retort, but Lisi placed a hand on his chest. Her touch was hot, grounding him. "This is not about survival," Lisi called out, her voice ringing clear. "It is about control. You were afraid, Father. You were afraid that without a leash, we would not be strong enough." She stepped forward, the bioluminescent sigils on her skin pulsing with a rhythmic, calming light. "Real leadership is not about managing fear," she declared. "It is about trusting your people to choose. You wanted to make me a symbol of obedience, a queen of a silent kingdom." She looked at Jace, and for a moment, the chaos of the station faded. The look she gave him was so raw, so full of fierce, unashamed adoration, that Jace felt his knees go weak. "I am not a symbol," Lisi said, turning back to her father. "I am a partner, and I do not love this human because the bond tells me to. I do not love him because of a relic or a ritual or a biological imperative." She took a breath, and the truth of her words resonated through the open audio channels, broadcasting to every soul on the station. "I love him in spite of it. I love him because when I was drowning in duty and cynicism, he was the only one brave enough to jump in the water. I will not be your puppet, Father. And I will not let you turn the galaxy into a cage just because you are too scared to live in the open." A murmur went through the crowd on the gantries. Alien envoys looked at one another. Human soldiers lowered their rifles. The authenticity of her voice, amplified by the lingering connection of the grid, hit them harder than any propaganda. Valerius stared at her, his expression cracking. For the first time, he looked old. "And you, scavenger?" Valerius spat, turning his gaze to Jace. "What great philosophy do you have to offer? You are a footnote in history." "A mistake." Jace laughed. It was a dry, raspy sound, but it broke the tension. He stepped up beside Lisi, his hand finding hers. "You are right," Jace said into the silence. "I am a mistake. I am a guy who fixes broken engines and owes money to bad people. I have spent my whole life feeling small, replaceable. Just another human trying not to get crushed by the gears of the universe." He looked up at the camera drones that were circling the platform, broadcasting his face to billions. "I did not ask for this. I did not want to be a hero. I just wanted to pay off my debts and get a good night's sleep." He squeezed Lisi's hand, lifting their joined fists to show the glowing, symmetrical brands on their arms. "But then I met her. And this accident. It forced me to ask a question I had been avoiding my whole life. Do I deserve something this big? Do I deserve to be loved by something this wild and demanding and terrifying? Jace looked directly at Valerius. You think power is about making people small so you can feel big. But real power, real strength, it is looking at someone who could destroy you and deciding to trust them anyway. It is choosing to stay when every instinct says run. He grinned, a crooked, exhausted expression that was entirely human. So yeah, I am a glitch. I am a footnote, but I am the footnote that just canceled your apocalypse. So I guess you are stuck with me. Laughter rippled through the tension, nervous, shocked, but genuine. It broke the spell of fear Valerius had cast. Above them, on the high command balcony, Senator Corvin was watching his empire crumble. His face was a mask of purple rage. He was punching commands into a wrist console, his eyes wild. If I cannot control it, Corvin screamed, his voice cracking, then no one will have it. He hit a final sequence. The station's defensive turrets, internal and external, swiveled inward. The red alert klaxons changed pitch to a rapid, screaming wail. Auto-destruct sequence initiated. The station AI announced pleasantly. Targeting grid core. Structural collapse in 60 seconds. He is bringing the roof down, Jace yelled, pulling Lisi back toward the console. Corvin turned to run, but he found his path blocked. Rhea stood in the doorway of the command balcony. She had discarded her helmet. Her face was bruised, her uniform torn, but her aim was steady. She leveled her heavy pulse rifle at the senator's chest. Move aside, you incompetent traitor! Corvin shrieked. Rhea did not move. She looked at the senator, then down at the platform where Jace and Lisi stood together. I am not the traitor. Senator, Rhea said quietly. She fired. It was a stun shot, but at close range, it folded Corvin like a cheap deck chair. He hit the floor, twitching. Rhea stepped over him, tapping her comms unit. Command override. Rhea barked. Authorization Rhea Delta 9. Belay the destruct order. Access denied. The AI chirped. Hardline override required at the core. Destabilization imminent. Rhea looked down at Jace and Lisi, her voice crackling over their personal comms. I cannot stop it from up here. The feedback from your broadcast fused the remote receivers. The grid is going critical. It is feeding on the conflict in the station. It is going to explode, and it is going to take Aegis Prime with it. Jace looked at the console. The readings were spiking into the red. The energy lattice around them was vibrating so hard his teeth hurt. The bond is acting as a chaotic amplifier, Jace realized, his engineer brain taking over. We opened the floodgates, but we did not build a dam. The energy has nowhere to go. Lisi looked at him, fear flickering in her eyes. What do we do? We have two choices, Jace said, his fingers flying across the holographic keys. Option A. We initiate an emergency sever. We burn the bond out. It will destroy the grid's infrastructure, kill the power, and save the station. And the bond? Lisi asked. It will be gone, Jace said, his voice dropping. The burnout will scour the neural pathways. We will survive, but the connection will be dead. We will just be two people again. Alone. Lisi stared at him. The thought of the silence, the return to the lonely, cold quiet inside her head was more terrifying than the exploding station. What is option B? She demanded. Jace swallowed hard. He looked at the swirling vortex of gold and blue energy in the center of the grid. Option B is we anchor it, he said. We stop fighting the current and we become the circuit. We fuse our biosignatures into the core. We stabilize the network by becoming its living governors. What does that mean? Lisi asked. It means we never leave, Jace said, tears pricking his eyes. It means the bond becomes permanent, not just biological but metaphysical. We will be tied to this network, and to each other, so deeply that there will not be a you or me anymore, just us. The station shook violently. Debris began to fall from the ceiling. 40 seconds, the AI warned. Lisi looked at her father, who was watching from the gantry, defeated. She looked at the thousands of people on the station who would die if the core detonated. Then she looked at Jace. She reached out and cupped his face. Her hands were trembling. "I do not want to be alone," she whispered. "I do not want to be safe if it means losing you," Jace replied, covering her hands with his. They did not need to say anything else. The choice was made. They turned to the pedestal. "Together," Jace said. "Always." Lisi answered. They slammed their hands onto the interface, but this time, they did not push the energy away. They pulled it in. The world turned white. It was not pain. Pain was too small a word. It was sensation overload. Jace felt his physical boundaries dissolve. He felt the fire of Lisi's soul pour into him, her memories of hunting in the snow, the smell of her mother's fur, the deep, ancient pride of her clan. And she felt him. She felt the salt spray of Earth's oceans, the grease under his fingernails, the quiet, stubborn hope that had kept him alive in the salvage yards. They were not two people holding hands anymore. They were a binary star system collapsing into a supernova. The grid screamed, a sound of pure harmonic resonance. The chaotic energy that was threatening to tear the station apart was suddenly grabbed, held, and ordered. The red warning lights turned to a blinding, steady gold. The explosion did not happen. Instead, a wave of light washed over Aegis Prime. It passed through walls, through ships, through bodies. It did not control and it did not command. It simply connected. For a brief, impossible second, everyone on the station felt what Jace and Lisi felt. A profound, terrifying, absolute love. A sense of being seen. A realization that they were not enemies, but just terrified living things trying to survive. Then, the light faded to a warm hum. The AI voice returned, sounding almost confused. Core stabilized. Network integrity absolute. External controls disabled. System is now autonomous. On the platform. Jace and Lisi collapsed into each other's arms, sliding to the floor. They were breathing in unison. When they opened their eyes, the gold light in their irises did not fade. It settled there, a permanent testament to the anchor they had become. "We are still here," Jace whispered, his voice echoing slightly as if he were speaking from two places at once. Lisi buried her face in his neck, breathing him in. "We are everywhere," she corrected. 6 weeks later, the jungle moon of Virel 3 had not changed, but the people living on it had. The outpost where Dr. Kor once hid in exile had been transformed into the headquarters of the newly formed Interspecies Bond Council. Jace sat on a wooden crate, holding a cup of coffee that was actually hot, watching a shuttle descend through the violet clouds. He wore a clean tunic, though he had rolled the sleeves up to reveal the sigils on his arms, which now shimmered with a soft, steady light that never dimmed. A group of reporters, human, lycanthari, and 3 other species were gathered near the landing pad, jostling for position. "Mr. Rios," one shouted, waving a recording device. "Is it true that the Harmony Grid is now being used to broadcast free educational data to the Outer Rim?" Jace smiled. "It is true. No more mind control. Just math lessons and history archives." "And what about the trial of Senator Corvin?" another asked. Jace shrugged. "Rhea is testifying today. I hear the evidence is overwhelming, considering we broadcast his confession to the entire sector. I doubt he will be talking his way out of it." "And your father-in-law?" a Lycanthari reporter asked, using the human term tentatively. "Former High Counselor Valerius has retired to his estate. Lisi's voice cut in. She emerged from the tree line, moving with a predator's silent grace. She wore a simple tunic and trousers, but the way she carried herself made it look like royal armor. "He is spending his time writing his memoirs," she added, stepping up beside Jace, "and learning that the new council, which includes humans and Krell and Valerie, does not require his permission to govern." The reporters surged forward, sensing a scoop. One of them, a persistent human with a camera drone, got too close, shoving the lens almost into Jace's face. "Mr. Rios, can you comment on the rumors that the bond causes—" A low, vibrating growl erupted from Lisi's chest. Her upper lip curled back, revealing the tips of her fangs. Her eyes flashed gold. The reporter froze, then scrambled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet. "Back up," Lisi snarled. "He is not a specimen." "Lisi," Jace sighed, though he was grinning. "We talked about this. No growling at the press. It tests poorly with the demographics." "He invaded your personal space," Lisi said, crossing her arms and glaring at the drone until it buzzed away in fear. "My instincts say he is a threat. Your instincts say the toaster is a threat if it pops too loudly," Jace teased. He stood up and wrapped an arm around her waist. She leaned into him instantly, the tension draining from her shoulders. "Okay, folks, that is it for today," Jace told the crowd. "We have a counseling session to run. There is a young bonded pair from the mining colonies who just arrived, and they are terrified. We need to go show them that the world is not ending." He guided Lisi away from the landing pad, toward the path that led up the cliffs. "You are the galaxy's most overprotective girlfriend, you know that?" Jace said as they walked under the canopy of bioluminescent ferns. "And you love it," Lisi countered, nudging him with her shoulder. "I tolerate it," Jace lied, "because the alternative is you blowing up a space station." They laughed, the sound easy and light, a stark contrast to the heavy silence that used to hang between them. That night, they sat on the high balcony of their living quarters, overlooking the glowing jungle. The twin moons were full, casting double shadows across the stone floor. It was quiet, not the ominous silence of the void, but the peaceful, living silence of a world at rest. Lisi was lounging on a cushion, half shifted. Her fur was soft, catching the starlight, her claws retracted. Jace sat behind her, his back against the wall, her head resting on his lap. He was idly braiding a small section of the fur near her ear. They didn't need to speak. The bond was a constant, warm current between them. Jace could feel her contentment, a deep, slow ocean swell. He could feel her sensing the perimeter, keeping watch so he didn't have to. "It is strange," Jace murmured, breaking the silence. "What is?" Lisi asked, her eyes closed. "To be free," he said. He looked at his hand, resting on her shoulder. "I spent my whole life thinking freedom meant no debts, no ties, being able to walk away from anything." He tightened his grip gently on her fur. But that was not freedom. That was just running. Lisi opened one eye, looking up at him. The gold iris swirled with affection. "And now?" she asked. "Now," Jace said, looking out at the moons. "I am stuck with you. I have a job I cannot quit. I have a bond I cannot break. I have the fate of the galaxy's communication network anchored to my nervous system." He looked down at her and smiled. "And I have never felt more free because I chose it." Lisi shifted, turning so she could rest her forearms on his knees. She looked up at him, her expression turning mischievous. "You know," she said, a low purr rumbling in her throat. "You tell that story to everyone, the one about how we met. It is a good story," Jace defended, and classic tragedy. Heroic engineer saves damsel, gets cursed. Lisi snorted. You are ridiculous. She reached up, her hand cupping his jaw, her thumb tracing his lower lip. Say it, she whispered. Jace rolled his eyes, but he leaned into her touch. I accidentally claimed an alien werewolf girl, he recited, the old joke now warm with memory. Lisi grinned, her fangs glinting in the moonlight. She pressed her forehead against his, the sigils on their skin flaring in unison, creating a halo of violet light around them. And now, she finished, her voice fierce and tender. I won't ever let you go. Jace closed his eyes, letting the bond wash over him, the promise, the protection, the absolute certainty of it. Good, he answered, kissing her nose. I am not going anywhere. They sat there as the moons climbed higher, two small specks in a vast universe, anchored by a gravity of their own making. The galaxy was big and cold and dangerous. But here, in the space between a heartbeat and a breath, there was no fear. There was only the bond and the beautiful, terrifying freedom of never having to be alone again.